Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Karoline Terrazas. She's the Organizational Performance Manager at Union Sanitary District. So hello, Karoline.
Hi, Corey. Thank you.
How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Great. Great
Good.
to be here. Yes, and oh, I should also mention we're going to have a couple polling questions once we get started.
Actually, I think our polling questions are for tomorrow. We'll have that. So for whoever's joining us for time management tomorrow, you get to answer some poll questions. Today, the activity you get to do is complete your assessment.
Okay.
So thank you. I will just go ahead and jump in, Corey. Is that okay?
Please do.
Perfect.
Take it away.
Well, if you haven't already heard, there is an assessment, a PDF in your chat box. Feel free to download that. You can certainly do that as I'm talking into our introductory slides. It's just your way to be interactive and to play along and learn a little bit about your working style. So let's see here, just managing my technology. All right, so what are we talking about today? It's working styles, is understanding your personal working style and how to interact more effectively with others. Like Corey mentioned, my name is Karoline Terrazas. I'm the Organizational Performance Manager over at Union Sanitary District. Been there since 2016. What do? I do a lot of different things, from managing continuous improvement, coordinating safety training. I have an emergency hat, lots of things. But before that, I spent a lot of time in for-profit education, and I have a master's in ed degree in training. So one of the things that I'm most passionate about is being here and doing these things right here in front of you. So I like to be in the classroom and interact and pick on people. I tend to throw chocolate and candy. Unfortunately, I can't do that today because of COVID and because we're online, but just imagine if that were the case. But I try to have a little bit of fun in my training. I know the interaction is going to be a little bit difficult. I know I have a hard stop at 1:50 because some of you might be moving on to a different session. So I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. So I talk fast, but you have the slides, so you don't really have to take many notes unless you have questions. And like Corey mentioned, you can certainly use the chat box. What's important to me is you're investing, your next 45, 50 minutes with me and learning about this topic. And so there are some things I want you to take away, kind of our session paycheck. Definitely discover your working style. If anything, the assessment is probably the most important piece, so you can identify your working style. And we're going to talk about some of those strengths and some of those things to not necessarily weaknesses, but opportunities that come with those different styles. Identify the strengths of others. So we're going to talk about all four. And some of us might very easily be able to identify our peers or our manager or our subordinates of their working style. And that's the whole point, is just becoming aware and getting educated about those styles. And then I leave you with, we're not going to dive too deep into it, but one of the things that's important to me is taking things away and applying them. And whether you're a manager, a leader, or if you're here just from your team representing, I am really going to support you taking this assessment back to your team and having a team activity where you can develop a communication strategy, because to be most effective, you have to be a strong communicator, and being able to identify different people's leadership styles is really the first way to go, or the working style. Always have to have fun with a little quote, right? So leadership or working style, right, is a leader's ability to provide direction, implement plans, communicating effectively, and motivating people. And like I just mentioned, really the core, whether this is about leadership or just understanding yourself or just being more effective, you can apply this to your personal life. The core to leadership really is being an effective communicator and being able to adjust and adapt to your style and to other styles. Before we jump into the assessment that we have today, I wanted to take a step back. I mentioned that I've been training for over 15 years, and one of my absolute favorite training topics, and some of you may recognize or may have gone through it, is the DISC training. It's a personality behavioral assessment. And I throw Can you hear me? Okay, I had a key that popped up that said I was muted, so hopefully everybody can hear me. You might recognize the John Maxwell leadership traits or Myers-Briggs. I think some of us go even back to our college days when we took Myers-Briggs to identify our career path. Strengths Finders is kind of an up and coming from the Gallup Association, Marcus Buckingham, one of my favorite people. And it's not more about personality style, it's more of an inventory of all the strengths and where you're the strongest. But the assessment that we're going to do today is very quick, has 5 questions, but it's really closely aligned to DISC. That's why it's one of my favorites. But I mention these because if you wanted to have a thorough, these are proven assessments that are out there that have been around for decades. They have a lot of science and research to it, to where you can learn more about your style and other styles. The one that we're going to go into next is just very general and an overview, but very much aligned with DISC. So I don't know if any of you guys have had the opportunity. If you haven't, it'd be certainly well worth your while to kind of look into some of these other more detailed assessment tools. All right, let's see here. Just navigating here. All right, so on the slide here, I put 10 minutes for the activity. And the activity is, as I mentioned, in the chat box, there is an assessment. It's the Working Styles Assessment. It's actually a handout that has 6 pages to it. And you can use this handout throughout our conversation. But what I'd like to do is I have 10 minutes on there, but if we can get it done a little bit sooner and forge ahead, that would be my goal. I know that's going to stress some of you out just based on your working styles and not liking to be rushed, but I want to try to get through as much of this content as possible. So you don't necessarily have to print it. You can certainly do it on a dual screen and write it on a piece of paper. But if we can let's start maybe with 5 minutes just to work on the activity, because knowing your own style in this assessment is going to help pave the way for the rest of the content. In fact, for those of you not working on it but have it completed, if you can jump in, and Corey, I cannot see the chat box, so maybe you can. If you can go ahead and do put your hand up in the chat box or give us the green check mark to let us know when you're complete. When majority of the participants have it done, we'll move on. And please let me know if there's any questions regarding the assessment. The instructions are on that first page.
Yeah, and there's actually a little reactions tab at the bottom of your screen. So if you just click the thumbs up like I just did, oh, look at all those thumbs.
There we go.
Yay, they're just flying in. Great.
Good.
Yeah, and we've got actually a couple pages here. So wonderful to see those who were able to fill it out early.
Yeah, definitely. And again, if you're going through it now and you want to know the instructions, on page 2, there are 5 statements or 5 questions, or you're going to answer the statement. And really what you're going to do is you're going to rank each response a 1 to 4, 1 being that best describes you, and 4 that least describes you. And as you're doing that, I know it's tough to fill things out while someone's chatting, but one thing to remember is that we're all a blend, a combination. A lot of times it's the pressures or the environments that we're in that'll change. Sometimes we have to change and adjust our working style, right? So when you do things like DISC or Myers-Briggs, same thing. We all have a blend of different styles, but sometimes one can be more predominant than others. And so when you complete this assessment, you answer those questions, you rank them. On page 3, you have basically a score sheet, and you just fill in the numbers. You transfer row 1 over row 2, then you total them at the bottom. Now here's the trick. A lot of us think it's the highest score, but it's actually the one that's your lowest score, because that's what you said you're most like or more relatable to. That is going to be your dominant working style. So I'm still going to give it about 2 more minutes, and then it looks like a lot of you have it done. And then once you figure out your lowest score, you can write in there expressive. Again, you have this handout. You can share it with your team, and that's really the goal, is the takeaway. Bring this back to your teams and go through this assessment. And then if you want, if you're already complete, why don't you go ahead and in the chat box, type in what your working style is. And then we'll kind of take a look at all the different ones that pop up. Now, yes, you might have 2 that have the score. That means you're a blend. You can certainly put both of those in there. It just, again, what that means is based on the environment or the action or the activity, you tend to lean a different way when it comes to your working style.
We have a lot of drivers. That's
Oh,
great.
goodness. We have a lot of drivers.
Do we have any passengers?
Let's see. Let's look at the chat. It's hard from my view here. Chat.
Is your chat not
Oh,
working?
I see it. I see it. Okay, we have some analytical, Frank, Carlos, Mario, Expressive, Heidi, your driver, huh? That's good to know. Let's see. Look at
Frank is
Jennifer Senko. She's
analytical.
got a little bit of everything there almost. Lots of drivers, Amiable. Good. So what do you think? Should we give it another minute? Corey, can you see by the thumbs if we're almost ready?
It says if I don't have any score for 1, is that the lowest score?
Oh, well, you should, because you have to put 1, 2, 3, 4 in every one. So the lowest score you would have would be 5. You should have a score for every single one if you completed the assessment by ranking 1 through 5. There unfortunately wasn't an option to omit it. So for our analyticals and fact finders and deep into details, you might have been forced to make a decision you didn't want to have to do. So yeah, the lowest score you'd probably have would be a 5. That would be your primary response to all of those. Have analyticals, drivers, expressive. Aha, Heidi asked my type. Well, you probably will figure it out in the next couple of slides. We'll talk about we'll go through the details of each one. So hopefully everybody's okay, and I'm not stressing anybody out, but I do want to make sure we get through a lot of this content. So we're going to move ahead. If you're still working on your assessment, you can certainly do that. You're not going to miss much. The next few slides, we're going to go over in a little bit of detail each of the 4 different styles. Now, if you have your handout downloaded or printed, that would be, and I realize there's no page number on this, but it would be the next page after the assessment or page 4. My 4 slides are going to be listed there, so you don't have to write all this down. Also, at the end of this, I'm going to drop in the chat box, I'm going to drop the additional notes that I give you for the different styles. I couldn't give away all my secrets right off the bat. All right, so now I got to close my chat box. Corey's going to be managing that, and I'm going to jump back in. So we do have a very good blend. Oh, so let's start with our analyticals, right? So you have a list of just a different description there, but I have a bunch of other information to share with you, right? So our analyticals, they tend to be very deep and thoughtful and can be very, very serious. Our analyticals tend to have very high standards, not just professionally, but also personally. And they can be very orderly, very organized, and they might have somewhat of a dry sense of humor. Now, let me take a step back. Again, if we're a blend, we might fall under some of these other categories. This is not a tried and true. This might not exactly describe you, but there might be stuff that you would connect with. And I also challenge you that as I go through some of these descriptions, think about your peers and your coworkers, or your boss or your subordinates, or maybe it's the operators or other people that you work with, or even folks at home. You can probably identify them just based on some of this description. The thing about analyticals too is they tend to be perfectionists, right? So when they want things done, they want it done right, and they want it done right the first time. They tend to be very neat, very tidy, and very, very self-disciplined. But we also know that with perfectionism, sometimes it can manifest into weakness. It's just because it can stall projects or decision-making just because of the focus and attention on having everything being just right. Our analyticals, just by the name of it, they tend to be very cautious with their decision-making. They like a lot of details. They like facts, data, charts, things that they can read, specific things to help them make decisions. They like to be and want to be accurate, and that's why they rely a lot on data. They tend to ask a lot of questions because, again, they want the specifics. What else can I tell you about them? They're very serious. They're well organized. They tend to be very logical and factual and reserved, right? So they may not be as expressive, right? They have little facial expression, more controlled body movements, and very precise. Someone that's a true analytical, you'll see that they're very reserved. They're patient. They focus on details. They like to work independently. Sometimes they put facts and accuracy ahead of feelings, where sometimes you just kind of have to go with your gut and make a decision. Analyticals tend to be very thinkers, right? They take more time to make decisions, which can be very good and very bad depending on the situation. To effectively, now here's the takeaway for you, right? And then one thing I wanted to mention, if you could already tell I'm bouncing around a little bit. On page 6 in your handout, there's an activity. We're not going to answer these questions, but if you're going to facilitate this back at your group, these would be great questions to ask. But I encourage you to take a look at those, because you can answer those through some of this conversation. And that is how to work more effectively with the working style, right? So to effectively communicate with an analytic or analyticals, you got to emphasize the rational, objective aspects. You have to give them focus on the facts. You have to give details. You have to be logical. You have to be very formal in your speech. Analyticals like to hear pros and cons for the most part, and the benefits, and they like things brief. They're not really, really big on the relationship building part. And again, that might apply to not all of you, but they tend to want to get moving. They're very task oriented and moving straight into the project, right? Or whatever decision that needs to be made. So be brief, but provide the detail when you're working with an analytical. All right, now looking at my time, let's move on to, and this is hard because if I'm in the room, I'm shouting at you and having everybody raise their hands. So we're going to do that virtually here. So our drivers, and I know we had a lot of drivers in here. So I'm sure you're just like, okay, Karoline, get to the point. What is it that I need to know, right? So drivers, kind of like the actual title, they can be dynamic, and they have a very active personality type. Now they're also task oriented, like our analytics. They get things done through activities and decisions and movement. And so a lot of times if you're a driver, you might exude more confidence because you tend to be more direct. And drivers tend to gravitate towards leadership positions. Not that every manager or coach, you have to be a driver, but you tend to see a lot of that kind of overlap. The thing about drivers though, they're quick, they move, they're quick to action, they make decisions. It's good to have a driver on your team if the rest of your team's kind of slow and just processing. The thing about the driver though, being a visionary that they are, they're not detail oriented, right? They're going to tell you like, here's the idea, here's the scope, here's the plan, here's the big picture, but let other people figure out the details, right? And how to get there. So they don't always think about the interim steps. The strengths are they're very determined, right? They can be very independent and very productive. And then let's talk a little bit about communicating, right? So, well, there's a perception, right? This whole weakness piece. The perception of a driver, though, sometimes can be tension in the work environment. Drivers tend to be workaholics because they're so driven to get things done and projects complete. That perception of them not being empathetic because they're more direct in their communication style. And again, it's not necessarily weakness, so that's a perception. It's all about how you adjust your style when you're going to work with someone that might be a driver, or to know that that's just who they naturally are in their working style. So to effectively communicate with the driver, right? So now let's just say, your boss is a driver. One thing to know is drivers tend to like to avoid the small talk. They like direct eye contact. They move at a rapid pace. They do business quickly. They like punctuality. So arriving on time, being clear, being specific, don't ramble. I'm a rambler, so that's my trouble if I'm working with my boss. But be organized and well prepared. I know one leader within my organization and my agency absolutely is a driver, and I know that I can have the best conversation with them and really get to decision making if I walk in confident with my message or my need with the details, but I'm quick and to the point. I can't sit there and really socialize. I have to drive to the driver to get them to get on my side. So just a few things on the slide that I listed there. They work quickly and efficiently. They like control. They dislike inaction. So if they're on this project team that's not moving, you're going to see those drivers get the most frustrated and more probably vocal and outward about it. All right, let's go on to the next one. So our amiables. Okay, so again, if you're looking at DISC, if you were to compare that, DISC would be like your steady Eddies, which to me is a huge, huge compliment. This personality type is very patient and well balanced, and they could be quite witty, but very sympathetic and kind. Your amiable on your team tends to be the glue, right? The person that wants to find balance and get everybody working together very, very collaboratively. The thing about amiables, they don't like conflict and they dislike that. And so they focus on building more deeper relationships. Unlike an analytical and a driver, your amiable and your expressive are very people focused. They're focused on engaging and getting things done through relationship and through people to motivate, inspire, and build and collaborate. They don't like the conflict, so that can be good and bad, right? What happens is you want everybody to be happy on your team all the time or have that same decision. And sometimes you can't. Sometimes you need someone to drive and just make the decision, where sometimes amiables are kind of just overly active listening. But they're very, very supportive. There on the slide, it shows that one of the weaknesses might be goal setting. And it's not that an amiable working style cannot. Sometimes you just need more direction. Our steadies, our amiables are more than willing to be a team player and contribute really, really well. But sometimes they're not going to be as outwardly as creating that path. They might need help and direction in doing that. They seek security. They want to be included. Just a really great member of the team. Let's see, if you are working with an amiable working style, be cooperative, be friendly, be supportive and patient. So I just mentioned your driver, right? You have your driver that's like, let's just go. I don't want the small talk. Let's get to business. Where your polar opposite is going to be your amiable. This is someone that says the business stuff's important, but the people, the heart, the emotion is just as important to me. And you like to take that time to set back. So amiables tend to have more facial expression. They make frequent eye contact, but they're not quite as aggressive. And I love this little note. Like if you see an amiable, they tend to have a lot of family photos and animal photos on their desk. They're just very kind of happy, collaborative folks, and very, very important part of your team. But remember, if one of your subordinates, right, this is about you being an effective leader. If one of your subordinates is amiable and you're a driver, it's about you being able to adjust and making that time to make them feel confident and included, right? So it's about being able to adjust your style now that you know who's on your team. All right, moving on. The final one, expressive. The other name for this is the social specialist, right? If you had to give a title, a working title in the workplace for this, it could be the social specialist, because they love to have fun. This individual, though, can turn disaster, right? Something kind of really dark, something like COVID-19, and bring it into humor, not in a kind of scare tactic or uncomfortable way, but just it's almost trying to see that positive light, or trying to get beyond kind of that change management piece. There's never a dull moment when you deal with an expressive. They tend to be very generous. The thing about expressives too is they like to be included in everything. Invite them to the party, invite them to the project, invite them to the conversation, because just that whole piece of trying to hear from others, build relationships, being persuasive, contributing. And so when you hear about expressives talking 200 words a minute, it's more like 300, because they can talk. Now, I know I'm on a very short time limit, but outside of this, those that know me, and then Heidi, you asked, what is my style? Well, right here is what it is. Definitely expressives like to create action and make decisions. We tend to be risk takers. The hard part is we can come off as being very disorganized, because expressives tend to jump from project to project or idea to idea. Much like a driver, they want to move forward and they want to be part of things, and they have this vision and dreams and a lot of great ideas, but it can come off as very, very overwhelming for team members that are trying to follow along. Also, the follow through can be a little bit difficult for someone that's an expressive, because you're so much open to learning and being part of everything. So you tend to work really, really quickly, but you can excite others. Let's see, it says jump from one activity to another. Let's end it with how to effectively communicate with an expressive. Here we go. Use a general approach rather than details. So again, expressives, they definitely like that relationship building, more conversational. They get too bogged down in the details sometimes. If you were to give someone, you know, like if you compare an expressive with an analytical, where one likes charts, data, and can read and interpret and understand what the story's saying, someone that's expressive would get lost in that and would rather just hear or see a different interpretation of that information. Focus on the big picture, allow that time to socialize, and then listen for opinions and paraphrase agreements. So again, someone that's expressive can almost go too fast for their own good. So being able to paraphrase what, you know, came from that decision or that conversation would be helpful with working with an expressive. All right, so I'm just trying to navigate here. I'm moving pretty quickly, again, watching my time, but there's so much great information. And like I promised, you do have the slides. And then in the chat box, you're gonna get the additional notes that I gave you outside of those 4 slides. You're gonna get more of those details. So you guys are gonna be experts at facilitating this for your own groups. So a lot like DISC, again, this assessment breaks down, if you were to put these different styles into a grid or a matrix, for example, the way you want to look at is your analyticals. Let's see if you can see my mouse. Your analyticals and your drivers are very task focused. They're focused on completing things, deadlines, activities, you know, anything like projects, things like that. Not that amiables and expressives do not, but they are more successful and complete things more through people, right? Through motivating, through expression, through collaboration and relationships and talking and being able to connect. Well, they might jump in, they take a little bit more time. Then if you look at your analyticals and your amiables, they tend to be a more indirect, a more reserved, if you will, kind of working style. These folks tend to ask more questions because they want more details. They want to hear more opinions. They want to seek as much information as they need to collaborate or to drive their own decision-making. Where your opposites, your drivers and expressives, tend to be much more direct, very outward, very loud, more telling versus asking, more risk-taking, right? So you can feel the polar energies. And so one thing to point out is you hear this concept of polar opposite. And that's what, as a leader, right? If you're managing your own team, if you identify with one of these, your polar opposite is going to be probably the most challenging, but I think challenges in the workplace are amazing opportunities to be more effective leaders. So if you're a driver on a team, your amiable personality is going to be much slower, much more reserved, and want more of that relationship social component. Where you're not, where you're more driven by more of directing and moving through. So that's going to be your biggest challenge, is someone that's very, very opposite of your style. Same thing with analyticals and expressive. I have some co-workers that are absolutely analytical. And I have to remind myself sometimes that if I'm going to work with them, I need to slow down and dig into the detail. If I'm the one initiating the conversation or need to get to a decision, I need to adjust my style because I know what they need to feel complete in order to make decisions or to communicate effectively. All right, this one here, I love this. So analytical driver, again, they think things through, where your drivers are move quickly, make quick decisions, where your analyticals are very focused. My fun thing on this I've read before, and this is my favorite, right? So it is said that if you want to go to the moon, you have to hire your drivers. So all of the drivers in this training today, you're getting us to the moon. Now, in effort to get back though, we have to get the analyticals on board. We have to get them because they have to definitely know how to get us back safely. And I like the vision, but how we're gonna get there and back. And so that's kind of my fun little analogy for those two there. Definitely start showing you how a balance of all these styles on a team can be very, very positive. Not necessarily that you have to hire for that style, but what you want to do is when you're working in a team environment, in a team meeting or what have you, know everybody's expressive style. So you're able to hone in. If you need a decision maker, maybe you lean more on your drivers. If you need more of a brainstorming meeting, you lean more on your amiables. If you need more research done on a project, you're going to lean towards your analyticals. You're going to find almost that it's almost like their strength, and really try to adapt your team environment around that as much as possible. And here's just another quick slide. Your expressive and your amiables, again, really relationship people. While one likes to move and change quickly, the other one is more balanced and more careful and exact, more casual and calm, where the other expressive tends to change their mind quickly. They move, 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 listen to a lot of opinions and move, move, move. All right. So I know I'm going extremely fast. Now, the next page in your handout is on page 5. Again, I apologize that there's not an actual page number on the PDF. Again, this is yours to keep. I didn't develop this. This is accessible and anybody can use it. What I love about this, again, this is a tool that you can bring back to your teams. We're not going to spend a ton of time doing this. But what it is, it's a matrix, if you will, or a grid. Hopefully you have it in front of you. If not, here's a screenshot of that handout. What you do is at the top is your style. And then down the side would be the other person's style. So you first kind of have to, have an idea of what everybody on your team is. So if you were going to use this tool for discussion with your group, definitely have them do the assessment first. All right. And then maybe plot everybody on the matrix, kind of identify, oh, okay, Susie is an amiable. We have Heidi over here as our driver. Robert is our analytic, right? Plot everybody out, get a good visual, a good sense, and then go through this handout. And what this is this is just a very general guide. Again, if I could, I would say everybody do the DISC assessment because it's going to give you so much more detail for communicating. But this gives you a little bit of a drive, right? A little bit of a focus, a little bit of direction, a tool to bring back to your team to become more effective communicators. So the way you would read is, let's just say you are, let's say you're amiable. That's your predominant, maybe that's where you're leaning. I know some of you are blends, but let's say you decide that as your predominant style, but that John over there is an analytical, right? So if you're approaching, the way you read it is if you are approaching that style, whether it's to introduce a conversation, a project, an idea, collaborating on something, or within a team meeting, or just general interaction, if you adjust your style, you can be a much more effective communicator. If you don't, the problem is those two styles that are so different are going to have difficulty collaborating, making decisions, moving ahead. There could be more conflict if you don't take the time to understand those different styles. So if I'm on this worksheet, this tool, it says the amiable to the analytical. Cut short the social hour and get down to the specifics. The more information you have, the better you can position yourself. Again, maybe you want to present an idea to your boss, or maybe you work in the lab and you discovered that there might be a process improvement that could help get through sampling faster, or you're a mechanic out on the plant and you see something and you say, okay, if we did it this way, it might be better. But let's say your boss is analytical. That because of your styles are being different, in order to influence, in order to gain commitment, or at least open up that dialogue to be more effective, again, you want to position yourself to where you're giving some of that detail. They're going to need it right off the bat. But also, it's not about, hey, boss, how are you doing? How's the family? It's kind of more like, get to the point. What is it that you need? Right? So that's how you really look through this handout. I'll point out one more. Let's say you're analytical and you are your coworker, you're assigned to a project with a coworker, maybe you're a project engineer and there's two of you working on it. And you're working with an expressive. That expressive needs to see big picture. You can't just say, here's a bunch of reports, figure out the data, and then let's come to a conclusion. You have to help them see the vision, the bigger picture, connecting the dots, probably a larger, a bigger conversation, maybe a little bit of socialization in there. Jazz up your presentation. So, if you can make it more interactive or more inclusive and asking more questions and driving there, you can have a much more effective communication. I mean, there's tons and tons of examples, and I don't have all the time here to do that, but this is a good starting point. I think the most valuable piece, though, is the discussion that you can have with your team. So here's the takeaway. You did the assessment, you learned just a little bit about yourself from a very, very general tool. You've heard some of the strengths and weaknesses of those styles. Now you can probably bring it back to your team, have them do the assessment. And then what I really, really recommend is plot, like I said, do the visual, see what everybody else is on your team. Just it's almost, if anything, an appreciation. Just taking the time to be aware already is going to help influence and improve your communication on your team. But if you want to take it another step further outside of that, take the time to go through this tool, right? Take the time. It's not the end all be all, but if again, you're facilitating this discussion, this is a great way to kind of help with some initial communication, breaking down the barriers, things like that. And then, like I mentioned on page 6, while we didn't do it today, there are some questions that you can ask. What do others need to know about your style to be more effective? In DISC, we have this activity that's called the do's and don'ts of communicating, and you post it out on your wall. You can do the same thing as you discover some of the details here and you learn a little bit more about each other, develop your own do's and don'ts, right? Don't socialize, get to the point, whatever it is. And then, if you want to facilitate more discussion on mixed styles and why it's good and what are the advantages and disadvantages of the different styles in the team, these would be some really, really great talking points if you want to bring that back to your team. And again, there's no tried and true black and white. This style is better than the other. Absolutely not. If anything, a very well-balanced team is probably the best way to go. But not all of us have that, and that's okay. So it's then just being able to recognize and be aware of our styles, right? So look at this. I'm ending on time. I'm going to end it with 2 last slides. All right. And this is so hard because I want you guys yelling at me too. But leadership, right? It's the capacity to influence others by unleashing their power, potential to impact greater good. I know that's a leadership quote, but I bring it back to influencing others. The best way, the foundational way to really influence people is to be a very, very effective communicator. And that's hard. It's a lifelong learning skill for a lot of us, right? Taking little assessments like this and just creating awareness, applying what you're learning, actually doing something with it is what's going to make us stronger. So to be a good influencer, be a good leader, it starts with really good communication, and that's understanding the various working styles because that'll influence decisions. It'll help drive performance. And one of my favorite things, it really creates team harmony because you can really focus on avoiding conflict, because a lot of conflict is not necessarily the item, it's just the emotions that involve because of different working styles. And that could be a whole other training. With that, with my super expressive, super fast, 5 million words a minute, here's our quick recap, right? So the session paycheck, hopefully I was able to accomplish what I said we would. But that's discover your working style and those of others. I'm glad everybody had a chance to complete the assessment and share in the chat box. Definitely a lot of drivers out there. And then be able to, now that you've learned about them, you might be able to identify some of your peers and their styles, and some of the differences between them. And then the last piece, which I highlight there, it's more of you taking it back. It's you applying it. That's where you're going to get a lot of your learning and takeaway is taking the strategy back to your team. Don't keep it all in, right? Take this PDF and use it, share it. Encourage your peers. If you are a manager or a coach or a supervisor, share it with your peers. Say, here's a fun activity or an activity you can bring with your team to improve communication. So definitely it's your takeaway. It's your homework. Hopefully you'll do it, takeaway. In my slides, there's just some quick references and then my contact information should after this you have any questions. Corey, real quick, can you drop in the chat box that there's a second PDF for those of you that are still on in the chat box. When I went through the 4 styles, I gave a lot more information than what was on the slide, and I wanted to make sure you had that if you want to facilitate your own meeting with the group. So Corey's going to drop that in the chat box. So be sure to download that one too. Yes. With that being said, I cannot believe it.
Congratulations.
Are there any questions?
Yes, well, we have a lot of questions. but I'll take them from the top. One is Anthony Smith said that he's expressive. He said, is expressive the DISC equivalent to influencer?
Yes. So yeah, you have your dominant is your driver, your influencer is your expressive, your steady is for this one, your amiable, and your compliance is your analytical. Absolutely, good job.
Great. And there, Tim Hayes asks, there is a correlation with, is there a correlation with at-will employees? Are they more likely to be one type or another?
You know, I do not have a hard fact or statistic on that. I would say not really, because your environment, when you answer these questions, it should just be your natural working style, regardless of what working environment you're in. I know a lot of people ask about DISC because it can change. And a lot of times it's if your role or your position might change, it changes slightly, but some of these are pretty ingrained. I would say this assessment's just a much, much lighter version. But I don't know if there's a specific. I think everybody, no matter what work environment, would have a similar working style, or whether they're at will or not.
And also, that's great. Is it better to do this work as a work group or with individual team members? Does it work well when done alone, when done as a group? ?
I think that's the best way. You know, if you're really trying to gain something out of this, it's the appreciation and understanding your peer. The best way to communicate is understanding everybody else's style. Now, if you went through DISC, you may have heard of the golden rule and the platinum rule, right? The golden rule is treat others the way you want to be treated. But when it comes to the world of communication and working styles, you actually follow the platinum rule. It's a great book. Whoever asked the question, or if you guys are curious, definitely look this up. The platinum rule is treat others the way they want to be treated. So when you think of a communication style, if you're trying to influence a decision, you're going to be much more effective if you adjust your style to theirs. So to do this individually, it's helpful because I think learning about ourselves is just human nature. But to bring that into your team and do this as a team activity and just have open dialogue in a safe space, you know, you might have, I mean, when I do this, I've been in teams where I have a bunch of folks from the lab and you would think they're all analytical, but they're not, you know, and you'd be surprised. So at your team level, and then I absolutely think leadership teams should do this within their team, because not all leaders are drivers at all.
Yeah, and then Tim says he was wondering, he's had good success by giving my analytical employees work that reinforces this personality type. It works great and keeps the person occupied and doing good work. Still, it tries my patience at times.
It does, I mean, yes, sorry.
Yeah, but he also said, I am a 50-50 amiable and expressive. The staff I supervise seems to be analytical and amiable. Who requires most of my patience, the analytical one and he also said, this is interesting.
It is interesting. So the way I use the term polar opposite, it's someone you're going to have more difficulty adapting. Gosh, can I get back to that slide real quick? Because I know we're out of time. If you're down here, hopefully you can see my mouse hovering. If you're amiable or expressive, you're definitely people. It's going to take a lot more work and it's going to take a lot more patience to adjust your style, because it means more work on your behalf if you're dealing more with analytics, more task oriented, right? So if you think of it more people emotional versus less emotional, that's where you're going to find the most amount of work. Right. It's not that it's impossible. I think we all have mixed teams and we've been able to function this far. It's just about how to be more effective. But it sounds great. You've already figured out you have data people. But just remember, everybody's a blend. Just because they tend to lean towards data they'd surprise you. Maybe they do want you to check in and see how their family's doing or whatever it is.
This is so great. Thank you so much, Karoline. It's been so much fun.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to see you guys. Thank you all.